versus tactical. So this is continuing on with our woman's career journey. We had a lot of great discussion on imposter syndrome and building out your personal brand. Now we're moving on to being seen as that strategic thinker over time. Who did I just lose here? Where's Kelsey? Kelsey,
Got me, sorry.
There you go. I see you. So Ashley Duncan is currently the Vice President at Georgia Pacific over customer experience. She has a wide range of experience working across the whole supply chain, from specialized experience from driving process optimization and automation. She's an experienced leader in driving culture, which is important as we've been talking today, managing, coaching, and developing large organizations with a strong passion for promoting and increasing women's talent and representation in the manufacturing industry. So that's a good segue from what we had talked about before of male-dominated fields. Ashley graduated from Georgia Tech with a bachelor's degree in management, where she was a 4-time letter winner of track and cross country. She obtained her MBA from Georgia State with a focus on operations management. In her free time, Ashley likes to travel the world, obviously pre-COVID, and trying new restaurants around Atlanta with her husband. She enjoys the outdoors and long weekend hikes, but not as much as her dog, Chloe, does. So appreciate you, Ashley, and the rest of the panel. I'll have you turn over and introduce our panelists.
Yes, perfect. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And unfortunately, Miss Cleo won't be joining us today because she tends to squeak her toys when she gets excited, and there's a lot to be excited about with the panel today. So welcome to our panel on being seen as strategic versus tactical. I'm very excited to be able to moderate it and being joined with some fantastic women that will be able to share some great insights. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and let's start with Linda.
Hello, everyone. My name is Linda Chow. I am currently an advisory principal consultant at AHEAD, and I work in the area of strategic and digital transformation. My experience is in strategy, architecture, process design and improvement, and operations. In my past career, I've worked at Merck, EMC, Equifax, and AHEAD. I'm a leader today in diagnosing problems and developing solutions for different service offerings while improving the service quality across collaboration across multiple teams. In terms of my education, I attended my bachelor's at the University of Maryland, where I received my bachelor in information science, and my master's degree is from Drexel University in information systems with a certificate in competitive intelligence.
Thank you, Linda. Danielle, you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Danielle Evans. Right now, I'm the CIO of Honeywell Connected Enterprise. And so right now, I lead a team that essentially is managing the IT strategy across the Connected Enterprise business, as well as ensuring the resiliency across the products that we sell to our customers. My background is really 15 years of experience across strategy, analytics, and driving digital transformation across sales, commercial, and engineering organizations. My experience goes from General Electric, so I spend a large amount of time at GE within the different businesses, as well as 2 years within Nike's organization. And just from an education standpoint, I have a bachelor's of science from computer science from North Carolina A&T, and then my MBA from Georgia Tech.
Thank you, Danielle. And last but certainly not least, Kelsey.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be joining you today. My name is Kelsey O'Donnell. I'm the Director of Strategy and Operations at Voxy, which is one of Atlanta's current fastest growing startups. So my experience is in the startup industry working on problem solving, or at least that's what my passion is. And I got out of tech back in 2015 with a business degree.
Fantastic. So you guys can tell we have some very, very impressive women on this panel, and super excited for you guys to get to hear their insights and experiences, and love Kelsey using the classic "I got out." time because we all love that. So without further ado, jumping into the questions. Ladies, so there's a point in our career where there's a pivot from being, that good worker or great employee to needing to be strategic to continue to advance. How would you describe what it means to be strategic versus tactical, and what kind of examples could you give us? Let's start with Danielle.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's funny. I was actually preparing for this and I was talking with a friend. And so I was like, hey, here's what the panel is, et cetera. And the first question he asked was, well, how do you really go from being, from tactical to strategic? And I was like, oh, you just stop doing the tactical stuff. And like, that's the easy answer. And then he's like, no, but how do you really do it? And I think, honestly, I started to have a conversation with myself on, what are the steps, what are the skills, or how do you really change the mindset from, I can't really do these tactical things, so now I got to start thinking about the strategic things, and I probably got to influence some others to help me get there. And so it really brought on this conversation around the definition of, hey, tactical is really the smaller steps to get you there. Strategy is really about, hey, I know there's an outcome I got to achieve, and how do I think about how do I get there? What are the pieces that get me there, and how does it help me achieve, my overall mission of what I'm going to? I always, approach strategy looking at it in a very simple way. My 3 things that I'm essentially asking myself for every problem, every question is really, what am I trying to accomplish? Where do I stand today? What is the industry doing? And then how do I get there? And I think if you, not even try to think about it from a, what are the big marketing words or what is the best way to say it, just genuinely have a super clear, transparent conversation on, these are the things I'm trying to achieve. This is where I stand today, good, bad, or ugly. And this is how I think I'm going to get there. Then you start to foster the strategic thought process around, here's an approach, here's the people, and then I understand the outcome I need to get to. So I think for me, those are the ways I try to approach it and think about it. And then it's a fine line, right? Tactical pieces help you build an approach, and approach helps you build strategy. And so I think you have to balance this middle line of, how do I get from this real tactical piece to how do I get to this strategic piece?
Yeah, for me, I think that I think of strategy as kind of the long-term broad goals that the business or a department is looking to achieve, whereas the tactical side is much more short-term steps, kind of the what am I doing on a day-to-day basis, what actions are being taken by myself or the team in order to achieve the goals in the long-term strategy itself. For me, oftentimes I will create what I like to call the roadmap for the strategy, which is really just like a map of activities across, probably month to month or by quarter, and even, 2, 3, up to 5 years. And kind of the, which would definitely need to be reviewed by the tactical plan or the tactical steps I'm planning to actually do, right, in order to achieve the strategy itself.
Yeah, absolutely. To both Danielle and Linda's point, I think that the strategy side of it is something that has the greater goal. But I also think thinking strategically and moving from being that good employee to that great employee is a muscle that we're always training, right? So how do I train the muscle of thinking strategically? And I think you can kind of break it down into one really important question to ask yourself, and ask it from a couple of different angles. And that's why. So let's take like a very basic task of being asked to present data back to someone, your boss, let's say. First, kind of understanding, why is my boss giving me this task? What are they trying to achieve? What is their intention in this task? And then I can go through the tactical side of getting the data, getting it correctly formatted in Excel, but then pausing to think, how am I going to present this back to them so that I'm telling the story of whatever I need to achieve from this? So why am I presenting it back in this way? So it's kind of taking that first step and thinking strategically, and just kind of answering the first question of, why am I doing this thing? How is it going to help? And how am I pausing before I just kind of send the tactical part off, to say, what can I do that's going to be meaningful from this? How am I going to, how am I putting my own spin on it so that it goes from being just getting that tactical task done to being something that's strategic and has thought. So maybe it's not just sending off the report, it's sending off the report with, hey, these are some insights I found around it and some ways that I thought it might be helpful to interpret the data. It's kind of taking that initial step from thinking from the tactical to the strategic.
Yeah, Kelsey, the only thing I'll add is I think you hit a super critical point that I don't want to be missed is really like when you think about strategy, it is okay to stop and take that moment to think through it, right? Mm-hmm. I think, I call it the like everybody runs for a rock. You're in a room, CEO says, I'm thinking about this. I think we should do this. And like everybody just takes off and run, right? But if you take off and run, that's a really tactical way of doing it. And you're just running out the rock versus taking like a second to say, all right, I heard you, but why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve with this? What is my opinion on this? Do I even think this is the right thing for us to go do? And then bringing that together. I think that's one of the biggest pieces that is most missed on when you think about transitioning, on just taking the time to stop, think through it, assess it, and bring back to what you said, your own personal flavor to the question that you just got asked.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things to do is to walk it out. So before I kind of go and answer something or dive into a problem-solving expedition or what is the right strategy to do here, walk out the problem, think through what are the things that I'm trying to think through. What would my competitor be doing in this instance? Why is my competitor doing it that way? Why is my CEO asking me for this piece of information that I just don't understand? What are the different ways to think about this so that when I come to the table to do the tactical part or the strategic part of solving for it, I've thought through all of those scenarios.
Those are great points and definitely help us segue into our next question. But I think we all probably can relate to the leadership saying something, everyone running. So I think that's a really valid point that probably everyone has dealt with on this call today. So thinking through how we interact with leadership and are seen as strategics, sometimes as that subject matter expert, we might know all the details of the subject. So how do you ladies balance sharing your knowledge when you present your point of view without getting too in the weeds when talking to leadership? Linda, can you give us some insights there to start, kick us off?
Sure. So oftentimes, like in consulting, we'll talk to many different levels of people in a company. It might be someone like an individual contributor. It could be someone who manages the teams or someone at the C-level suite. So the first question I always come to for myself is, for my audience, what level is the audience themselves, right? And kind of segment based on that. In terms of the type of information and not being too stuck in the weeds when you're talking to higher level management or C-suite, what I like to do is kind of categorize the data itself to identify different themes, really supporting the outcome of what I want to come out of the conversation. So I'll always go back to what am I looking to achieve in, let's say, the 15 minutes that they'll give with me, right, where I have their undivided attention. So I think it's really critical to know the audience themselves, kind of looking at it from their perspective. What do you want to achieve so that you have, the right level of information that you're presenting and going to be discussing with them. It's kind of like, what's your why? Like if anyone's familiar with Six Sigma, right? And always have that 2-minute pitch kind of ready, something that you can state very succinctly, and really what benefit will they be getting out of it, and kind of target your conversation based off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of add on to that, I think one of the things that I think through a lot, so being in the startup environment, one of the things we do frequently is we report out to our board, right? So when we're doing that, thinking through what are the leading indicators that are helpful for them to know what is the health of the business. So as the board, they're looking to us to be able to say, you're doing X, Y, and Z, which is an indication of health or success. So in presenting that information, there's the tactical part of creating the information, getting that aligned, and then the strategic part of what's the story I'm going to tell around the data. how, if one of the numbers maybe isn't as healthy as we would like it to be, or if it's really healthy, how do we tell that story of this is the thing, this is the data, this is exactly what I want you to know about the data and why it should be important to you. Then also having prepared, what are the questions that they're going to ask me about this data? If I take off my this side of the table hat and put on the other side of the table hat, what are the things that they're going to want to know that is really helpful and important and going to help them make a better decision or be more included in what's going on?
Agreed. And I think, so the last thing I'll add is, I know when you're balancing, sharing all the knowledge, of course you want to share the level of detail, the research you've done, right? But for me, what I've always done is leverage the opportunity or welcome the opportunity for Q&A, right? Q&A is a really great opportunity for you to not only have shown the strategy in your presentation, but now be able to use that time to show your approach, to show the thought leadership that went into it, and to get in the weeds if that leader wants to get in the weeds with you. It's about knowing your audience. I think the second piece is, when I first started doing presentations and leading strategy, I'm a super fast talker. And so my idea of strategy was really like, hey, how many words can I quickly say to get a whole point across? Versus stepping back and saying, look, I got 2 minutes to drive a really big change. And what are the 3 things that need to come out of the 3 things that I need to articulate to help them understand the outcome, help them understand the why, and help them understand what I need to move forward with this. And so what I've typically done as an exercise is whenever I have a presentation, literally on the paper, I write 1, 2, 3. And it clearly says in 1, 2, 3, these are the points that basically people ask you, what's your criteria for success? These are the points I need to make for me to say that was a successful conversation that I just walked out of. So these are the 3 strategic points that I need to articulate in that very short amount of time. And so what I'm doing in that conversation is, even though I'm not reading those points, I have that in the back of my head to say, that needs to be made, check. This needs to be said, check. Did I ask them for this? Check. And that makes sure that for me, not only do I walk through the strategy, but I make sure I articulate the points, and I make sure I walk out of a room ensuring that everybody got on the same page with what I needed, and everybody's clear on what we need to do to move forward.
Great insight, and I love the takeaway, the 1, 2, 3. So hopefully people can apply that as they move forward. But definitely super important, as all the women said on the panel, to know your audience and know what they want when you're framing up those point of views. So positioning your point. So jumping into our next question and a little bit of framework that we want to share with you all is, we've heard from everyone that positioning your point of view to be well thought out, it's incredibly important to being viewed as strategic. And we put some slides together that we'll go through now. I'll go through quickly just to give everybody kind of a takeaway to go home with of just an example to think through how we might present alternatives in the future to be viewed as strategic. So I'll go through quickly, and then we'll jump to our panel again to give some examples of where they utilize maybe a similar framework, or how they find strategically kind of framing up your point of view to help them be viewed as strategic. So and again, this is very basic, but we wanted to give some framework, but it's super important that we outline what's your current state, what's your current state situation, what are you trying to accomplish, and does that point of view of what you're trying to accomplish tie back to your company vision? So as you think about asking something to leadership or working to put together a point of view, really make sure you're grounded in what that business vision is and that it supports it. Because if it doesn't, probably not the best point of view to bring forward. So starting there, framing it up, and then providing alternatives. So we want to make sure to be seen as strategic that we provide alternatives when we're trying to solve a problem or present a point of view again to leadership. So these are just some basic things that we think are important. This isn't all inclusive. I'm sure there's a lot of other things, but just things to think of, what is that value that's created? What is the cost? that might be associated with the alternative that you're recommending. What are those risks? What are the benefits? What's the timing look like? And then are there additional factors to consider? And then lastly, and Danielle touched on this a little bit already, but we always want to make sure we outline what are those next steps. You don't want to frame up a point of view and then not know what the next steps are. So really kind of putting those point of views into a framework somewhat like this, we think will help everyone and be more strategic moving forward. So we have a made up example. If you go to the next slide. So this is just an example. Again, I won't spend time going through all of it, but we can definitely share the material if it's helpful for people moving forward. But, you know, this is just current state of a logistics team. So trying to highlight some of the key things that are driving our point of view and alternatives that we'll present on the next slide. But currently not providing, you know, excellent service to our customers behind based on our resourcing. Our project work is pulling, you know, established resources from our daily work, which is creating risk and more strain on day-to-day business. You know, we currently have a full-time employee out with a to be determined return date. There's no resources available to leverage across other businesses currently or in the foreseeable future. So that's important because we want to think beyond our team. So every time you bring point of view forward, you want to make sure you've kind of thought through all the alternatives before you ask for something. And then need that resourcing immediately, and potentially additionally in June, we might need some more resources. So when we ask something, one thing we want to make sure to be seen as strategic is we really think, you know, what's going to happen 2 months down the road, what's going to happen 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Are we going to have to come back and ask the same question again? Well, then we're probably not going to be viewed as strategic. So make sure when we're framing up those point of views that we're thinking forward of what's happening in the organization and what it is that might come at us soon, so that we can talk about that in our discussions the first time and don't get caught off guard 3 months later going back to the well, because that's, again, not going to be viewed as very strategic. So the next slide. I will not read through all of this, but just want to showcase it's important to provide alternatives. You want to make sure you share what you're recommending from an alternative perspective. So on this slide, you know, we're recommending alternative 1, but we're providing 3 different alternatives that we believe could work. So a little description of what your alternatives are, what those costs are, what benefits might be, what are additional factors to consider that, you know, you think might get asked as you from leadership as questions. So what are downfalls, and then making sure all those things are framed up and you're really thinking through as you present your point of view. And do you have to do this for absolutely every decision that's made? No, but as you think through, you know, pitching and talking to leadership, it's important that they understand, because they're not in your everyday. They're not in the weeds of everything you do every day. So it's important that they understand that you thought through all those alternatives and you present that to them so that they can quickly understand the need and then, you know, provide insight on your alternatives. So again, this is just a short little framework with a made up little example to help give some structure to providing a robust point of view. So I will give it to Danielle to kind of share maybe an example of when you might use, maybe not this framework, but a similar framework, or how you might approach or any additional things that might help as you're putting together a framework like this.
Yeah, so look, you hit all the big points. I think, you know, to what you said, with any conversation that you're having when it comes to strategy, I think what you have to remember is, one, the strategic conversation of what's the outcome, what do you want people to gain from it, where do you want them to go? That's one piece. But there's a whole nother strategic piece on how do I get people there, right? What's the meeting before the meeting? How do I influence people to want to get on this side with me? How do I have, how have I thought through all of the challenges, the detractors? I always say, you need to know who's on your side, who's not on your side, so that you can bring them along the journey. All of that is a comprehensive package of what is strategy, right? And so I think here's an example. One example is, let's say you're pitching to a leader and you say, instead of selling to a distributor and then the distributor selling to our end user, I think we should just go direct to the end user, right? And so the first proponent of that is, here's a problem, here's the solution, here's what I think we should do. We should go direct to the user, and here's why. Let's say you walk out of the meeting and checkbox, we're now going to go direct to the user. That's just one proponent of a successful strategy. Now there's a secondary proponent of when you walk in their room, there's a CFO in that room. He wants to know financially what it means to do this. There's a sales and commercial team in that room. They want to know, have you thought about the people it takes to enable this? There's probably an operations person in the room that's like, no, this absolutely doesn't make sense. And they want to know, have you thought through how you're changing their entire model, right? So the whole thought piece of building this comprehensive solution on here's where I want to go. This is why we need to go here. I've had all the pre-conversations. I brought everybody along. And now we're walking into the CEO's office with everybody on the same page. To me, all of that becomes a part of your strategy, as well as here's all the alternatives. And this is absolutely what I think we should do, standing strong on why we should do your particular recommendation. And then if it doesn't go where you think it's going to go, I think that's totally fine too, right? Understanding that not everything strategically you want to do will happen, and working through like what's the fallback plan on if it just doesn't go that way.
Yeah, absolutely, Danielle. I really love what you said there. And I think it kind of underscores the fact that strategy is not an individual sport, it's a team sport. So kind of the socialization of an idea, trying to get more information, going ahead and kind of doing that 2-minute pitch or those 3 points that you want to get across to other people before you ever get into that room is really important, because what you can do is you can refine those ideas. You can hear from other people. Good ideas and good strategies don't come from one mind, they come from a lot of minds. And getting other people's opinions is really helpful. And that goes for big presentations that you might be preparing for a whole quarter or a whole month or whatnot. And it also applies to things that kind of pop up in your day to day. So in my world, there tends to be a lot of firefighting. So when a fire pops up, how do I, before I jump on that Zoom with the team that we're going to start working through the problem together, how do I take that pause? How do I think through what are the events that have happened? What are the things that need to happen? And what are kind of my action points that I want to occur from this? How do I think through those things prior to getting on the call? Take that breath, take that pause, so that when we jump in, we can start as a team working together and all kind of take the strategic approach to how we're going to solve this problem.
Yeah, I think for me, I think that being able to position your point of view also comes with just kind of like work on your own to keep be current with different trends and best practices that are, existent in the area. I think the key comes back to knowing the audience of who you're going to speak to. So for example, back to our example that Danielle started with is if you know you're going to be talking to someone from finance, maybe someone from marketing, someone from sales, like know and be prepared with different questions they're going to ask right from their perspective. So doing some of that research on your own, spending some time to make sure you understand it such that when they do have that second level and third level of question that is discussed, that you are prepared to answer intelligently to support your point of view, right, for the outcome that you want to achieve. I think that's like the strategic side. But then it's also a balance of having the tactical answers, right, to be able to have those intelligent conversations and dialogue.
Great points. Go ahead. All right, we might have time for 1 to 2 more questions, and then feel free to send any questions in the chats too if you guys have any for the panel. But what's your guys' advice on how to continue to refine your strategic skills? Is there anything you do to continue to stay fresh in this area, or that you did initially to develop these skills? Kelsey, why don't you lead us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like I said, this is a muscle that you're constantly, you're working on. And as you work on this muscle, it's going to become something that's more innate in everything that you're doing. So thinking at a higher level, thinking strategically about what you're doing. And for me, this question always comes to why. So as I'm working throughout my day, probably much to my team's annoyance, I'm kind of always asking like, why are you thinking about things that way? And it's not meant to be a questioning. It's, I want to hear your thought process, because if I can hear your thought process, it's a way of me learning from that thought process, learning from what you're doing, so that we can always be thinking through things and thinking a little bit more strategically together. So maybe how can we think through this in a different way? So always kind of thinking about that why and questioning your why. So why have I had this position? Is this still a relevant position? Has the industry changed in some way, shape, or form? Wow, that's a really interesting article about something that my competitor is doing. Why are they doing it that way? What could be some benefit that they're having from it? So just constantly kind of iterating on that. One of the coined phrases at my current company is strong opinions loosely held, and I think that goes for strategy too. So strong strategy loosely held. So how do you constantly think about things and iterate and ask yourself why? Because if you're always asking yourself why, naturally you're going to think at a higher and more strategic level.
I'll jump in. I think, the ability to stay fresh with strategy, I think it first starts with, don't think about strategy as just being in the office, right? When I think about strategy is really about a trusted partner, a thought leader, and a value of people that bring opportunity in a different way of doing something to an organization. So I think you have to first take yourself out of, hey, I'm just strategic at work, and how do I just be strategic with everyday things? So anything I'm doing, whether I'm looking at TV, looking at a football game, thinking through and a decision I'm going to make in my life, am I thinking about why am I doing this? Why is it valuable? What are the opportunities? Are there other ways to be doing this? I think that just kind of keeps you fresh with the thought process or the framework to how you approach and how you deliver on strategy. I think the second piece, which Kelsey is, you absolutely have to stay engaged in not only your industry, but you have to remove that comfort of your industry and start to look at what's going on outside of your industry. So I'll never forget, when I worked at Nike, everybody knows Nike, in my opinion, Nike's the #1 brand when it comes to marketing. And so I would partner with my leaders and I would say, well, hey guys, what is Adidas doing? What is Reebok doing? And it was this concept of, well, we're Nike. We run this industry. We don't have to look outside, right? But I do think you should always know not only what your industry is doing, what your competitors are doing, and what other people, even in retail, I want to know what Walmart's doing. I want to know what everybody's doing because one, I need to be read up on what's going on in my arena. I need to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. But also I need to be able to, in the room, say, why are we not doing this? And some proponents of it may be, it's not the right thing for us to do. That is a strategic thought process. But then there's a proponent of, you know what, we absolutely should be doing this. And now I need to go push the boundaries of the organization to get them to see that we need to be doing it. And then that whole framework of being strategic and getting people on board immediately comes right back into play. And so not only are you staying fresh on the industry, you're staying fresh on the skill set and the muscle of doing strategy within your organization.
Yeah. Thank you guys covered it.
That was really good insight. Alinda, did you have anything to add?
For me, I think it's important, and I think we've touched on these points, to, go to training and just be current on what the different best practices are, whatever industry that you work in. For me, I work in architecture, so I have a TOGAF training. I'm in process, so I'm IDLE version 4. Whatever it is, just make sure that you are always staying current. It's kind of you don't get to rest, right? But then once you have that knowledge, right, from attending training, then it's the application of it. And maybe it's also learning about areas that are outside of your comfort zone. I remember back when we used to go into the office, I would always try to meet with people from a totally different area, just to understand, what type of work they do, what's important to them. Like, for example, I've always worked in IT, so maybe work with someone from finance or sales or marketing, an area that isn't my forte, to make sure, like, an easy way just to learn about what it is, what's in it for me, right? That phrase. What are they always looking at and trying to achieve? Because it's not an area that I may work in from the day-to-day side. So that would kind of help enable me in my tool set to understand, looking at it from so many different perspectives of what I want to achieve, how to get their buy-in so that I can present things such that I answer those questions to present the value and benefit for them, even though it might not be an area that might be my strong suit or I might know inherently.
Great feedback. All right, so we're going to take a couple questions that came in, but I think it's clear understanding your audience and framing it up appropriately is super important based on all the feedback and insights given from the panel. So first question, I like the model of framing your point of view. How would you frame it up if you only had one recommendation?
I mean, for me, just to take my perspective, like, I would probably write down all of the different points of view that I have, and I would try to kind of look for a common theme across it, such that, the one recommendation kind of encompasses the others, should that conversation come about. So that would be my approach to that.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever one recommendation. And it's not to sound like frank or anything, but I just really don't. I think, here's my opinion. No one problem is unique and no one problem is new. Every industry, every company has faced the problem that you're doing. You just got to go search for it. So I think maybe in the room and the discussion you're having, yes, there's one recommendation. But I think if you go do a little bit of research,
use this to your superpower. So goes into like self-awareness of knowing yourself. So like on the DISC assessment, if you're someone that might be a stronger D, you might be more willing or more common to say that there's only one recommendation here. You're very direct and definitive and like the only option. And part of being strategic is to challenge your own thought process of, well, why do I think that this is the only recommendation? Well, obviously it's because it's the best recommendation, but to really be sure that it's the best recommendation, you have to think about what are all the other recommendations that we could go through. And you'll be able to better give that recommendation in the moment or in that formal presentation if you have thought through those, or at least you're showing that you're thinking through those.
Great. Okay, so how do you recommend expanding your horizons to understand the bigger picture? For example, if you work in marketing, how do you learn what matters to other teams or leaders?
I think Linda had a great recommendation for this, which is talk to them.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Yeah, I think it's a great practice to talk to people. And I know with kind of the virtual world we're living in, it feels a little more awkward now than ever. But get those virtual coffees, talk to people. When people give like on an all hands stand up or something like that, like announce an update about something or a new feature that they're talking about, like schedule 15 minutes with them to learn a little bit more. Just because it's not your area of expertise doesn't mean it doesn't have something that you could learn, or it has a strategic thought in there that you can apply to this other scenario or other problem that you're trying to solve. Everything can be applied in different ways, just like Danielle was saying.
Kelsey, I think you hit it. Like, go, as soon as I heard the question, I'm like, go ask them. It's really that simple. One thing I've learned very early in my career is people may not have a lot of time, but no one will ever say no to a conversation if you asking them to talk about themselves. Oh, yeah. So literally go ask them, like, why is this important? Why do you do this? Help me understand it a little bit more. I always tell people, like, go do a walk in their shoes exercise. If you're in marketing, you want to go understand sales, go be a salesperson for one day. Literally reach out to your sales agent and say, I want to understand what you do. Can I sit in a customer meeting? I want to see how you sell. Literally go understand it. I mean, I'm in IT and I genuinely do marketing exercises, sales, commercial, because when I'm thinking about a solution, I need to understand why it's important to them and what they do. I need to bring them something that helps them. So I think the simplest piece is literally pick up the phone, get on Zoom, put your face on camera, and have a conversation with them on, I just want to understand what you do. I just want to be smarter about your area so that I can support you better.
Yeah, and I'll also just say that's the difference between net weaving versus networking. So you're also continuing to grow that expansive group of people that you can reach out to and that you've learned from and can continue to learn and work with in the future.
All right. I think that is all the questions we have, so I appreciate it. I think we got some really great insights from the team, so thank you, ladies, for being on the panel. Definitely make sure we ask why, understand our audience, roadmap out, think through all those alternatives, and super important, as we just highlighted, to work cross-functionally and understand that whole supply chain that impacts those point of views that you're recommending. And to Danielle and Linda and everyone's point, I gotta pick up the phone and call and learn more, because that'll help you be better, more strategic and not think through in those silos that you might work in. So thank you, ladies, so much. Appreciate it. And with that, I will go ahead and have us transition over to the SME Queen breakout session.